All right, degenerates, we've got a fun one today. It's going to be an interesting take on the Caro-Kann, how we're going to go after it. I've got my emotional support pickle with me. Camera's pretty bad, audio might be all right, but either way, we're going to get into it. Now, traditionally in the Caro-Kann, for the longest time, I've been playing the exchange with Bishop D3, which has been it's been okay. You get something along the lines of the following: D5 takes bishop D3, and then usually what happens is I just delay playing knight F3, and then bishop comes out to F4, probably reinforcing the center pawn with C3, and then usually some type of a king side attack with a black going after my queen side, and that's been okay. I think I have a decent win rate with this. Looking at me personally, um, with the exchange, so ED. I have a 61% win rate. I've done I was playing the fantasy variation for a little bit. That's an interesting one, but you tend to just get kind of blown off the board by people that know what they're doing. I haven't memorized a lot of the fantasy variation, but it is kind of fun. It's an interesting take. And then I've played the advanced a little bit back in the day. But yeah, I have a decent win rate, 61% with the exchange. But what I'm switching to, and I think this is what I'm going to do against the Caro-Kann from now on, especially when I'm playing lower rated opponents, is this new situation that we've got going. So we've got our basic E4, C6, D3, and then D5, striking in the center. Now, this is a bit of an odd one. D3 is a little bit weird. Typically, you're going to see a lot of D4 right off the bat. I haven't played this move in any games yet on Lee chess, but it's a very interesting take. So you end up playing knight F3, and after E takes, or excuse me, D takes E4, we have knight G5, knight G5. And th yeah, it's a really interesting move. I'm basically going to go over a variety of things where we're going to look at what happens when we go into the base of this thing. So the most common response is this, right? Pawn takes, bishop comes out, and you can kind of see there's going to be a lot of tactics at play here. There's going to be some interesting moments, some really nice ideas, and black doesn't have to go into this, right? So we're going to cover what black can do before going into this situation. Typically it ends up being a pretty good endgame for white. Um, Again, if black knows exactly what to do here, then you're going to be chilling. I mean, that black will be okay. But if you look at the database, right, reaching knight G5, E takes D3 is played almost every single time, right? 57% of games, the majority. You're going to see knight F6. We're going to go over knight F6, right? And you're still going to get a lot of fun positions, and it's going to be totally fine. I think the best move in this position is to take. So most players are going to take it. It is the best move, and black has a slight advantage according to the computer. And I mean, this computer is my laptop sitting in front of me. My physical computer is garbage, so it's not going to be running Stockfish at all today. But after ED, Bishop D3, I believe the best move here is Queen C7, which is nearly a novelty. I think it's been played only a couple hundred times. Yeah, I think the engine really likes Queen C7. So that's what we're going to go through today. Um, yeah, let's get into it. So first things first, when we're staring at this position, just look at the Lee chess database here. It's pretty ridiculous what's going on. We get knight f6, completely winning, most popular move. White is almost completely winning. H6, white is completely winning, and even these other moves, white is doing very well. And we'll talk about each one of these moves specifically. So before we go crazy, we're going to talk about what we're used to seeing. So what are we used to seeing in the Caro-Kann? Well, typically we've got this situation with the exchange. We've got knight f3. We've got a pretty it's a fun game to play. I don't have any problems with this position. This is what a lot of folks might play, what they're used to. I mean, personally, I'm not playing D3 very often, but that's certainly a move you could play. Another variation of this would be D3, D5, knight F3, DE, and then recapturing, right? So instead of playing this knight G5 situation, just recapturing the pawn on E4. And again, that's our most common move here. Obviously, knight G5 is the second most common because people realize that this opening is quite nasty in a lot of ways, especially if you don't know how to respond to it. But DE is your most common response, and it's going to be an interesting game. Just kidding, not really, because you're just going to get a queen trade a lot of the time. And now, I mean, I don't know what we're talking here. White is we're just drawing here a lot of the time. It's pretty boring. I left the comments on this one. What did I say? I said just going into an even endgame. Yeah, so basically we're just going into an even endgame here. But yeah, so instead we're gonna do something a little bit different. And after DE, we're going to play knight G5. And there's a lot going on with this move. After bishop takes D3, we're putting a lot of pressure on F7. We're putting a lot of pressure on H7. Notice a common theme alert. H7 is under pressure by two pieces here, right? The knight and the bishop. And that's going to be a common thing is us possibly taking on H7, even when it seems weird. It seems like we're just grabbing a pawn, but commonly the knight can actually bail out by capturing this bishop. The queen can get involved without trading the queens. And there's a lot of tactics on this king side that are a lot of fun. All right, so before we go crazy, what if they're stingy? So, what do I mean by stingy? Well, they don't have to go into this line exactly, right? What if they pin your knight on F3, right? Instead of taking and then allow and then knight G5, right? What if we just get bishop out to G4? Well, again, we can just play this pretty casually and still get an excellent position. H3, bishop H5, bishop E2, just very simple development. We're doing totally fine. E6, and we're not worried about, this knight getting pinned with an attack from a pawn. Again, we can recapture if they ever take. If they ever take DE, we can simply recapture castles, knight F6, E5, knight FD7, and then D4. And we have a really nice center, right? We have pretty easy development. We've kind of expanded the scope of the light squared bishop. We can probably push this a bishop away at some point. Our dark squared bishop doesn't have a lot of great squares, right? It's going to be behind these pawns for a little bit, but we also have nice development of our knight to C3. So I think this is a pretty pleasant position to play for white. I think it's pretty even. I think the computer would agree. If we turn it on here, yeah, it's a pretty even position, right? So you haven't gotten what you wanted, which is, a lot of interesting tactics in a fun game. But I think this is pretty strong. You're constraining black a little bit, and there's a good probability that this is going to kind of turn into a French, right? With a C5 push. Luckily, I mean, you're out of the center already, but yeah, you'll see that there's certain lines here where it kind of turns into the French. And if you know the French, it's you can kind of punish the French, especially if black doesn't know what they're doing in the French. You can really make black uncomfortable for essentially 20, 25 moves, and then just destroy them on the king side. So let's take this again. What about a different move here? So we've got this similar situation, D3, D5, and we play knight f3, and instead of playing DE, they play knight f6. And this is still going to be fine for us, right? Again, we have a really nice push in the center here. This move e5, right? Kind of chasing away this knight. And you'll see that we end up with a pretty similar structure as before. I really like this move d4. And again, we get a nice, essentially pretty much the same thing as we have before without the bishop coming out to g4. Castles, bishop d3, Bob's your uncle, you're smooth sailing. Now, they could also play knight g4 in response to this e5 push. If knight g4, I still think that solidifying in the center with d4 is a nice move. And after e6, now again, we have this like nice like pyramid structure versus our d4, e5 situation. We can lash out with c4 here, with our nice bishop defending this pawn. Now we're opening up space. We're going to bring our knight out possibly. You may see bishop b4 check. That's fine. We'll block it with the knight. Castles a3, pushing the bishop back. Bishop takes c3, bc3, knight d7, bishop d3, a6, bishop takes h7, check. Oh my goodness. So, this is some of the fun stuff that can happen is this kind of feel and not exactly, but I've seen a lot of these kinds of, bishop takes h7 sacrifices in the exchange Caro-Kann, right? So a lot of the times in the exchange Caro-Kann, you might see these possibilities of bishop takes h7 and a lot of kingside pressure. And that's what you can see here is like from this position, right? You have an undefended knight on g4. It's just been sitting there, and now we can go after it. Bishop takes h7, king takes h7, knight check, and queen takes, and we're doing really well here, right? D takes e4, and if he plays around too long, now it's just getting nasty, right? It's just getting really nasty. Bang, pound, pound, right? So that's a really fun one, especially if they play that knight hop instead of hopping backwards. Yeah, if we go back to d4 here just for a second, right? So we reinforce e5 after the knight hops to g4. We could also play h3 in this position, and then we're essentially forcing knight h6. There's not really another situation for the knight. Knight takes f2 is completely dubious, and knight h6 is essentially forced, and now that's a win in the opening in my book. If you end up with pretty much full control over the center, uh, better development, and Black's knight is on h6, you're usually doing just fine. Cool. A little burpee tonight. Trying not to burp too much. What else do we have here? So there's a third way that they can be stingy, right? I think we all know what stingy means at this point. There's more ways that they can be stingy, but we're gonna get through it. Basically, in this scenario, instead of taking, they play e6, right? And again, we get this c6, d5, e6 structure that we've seen so often. You'll see in the lead chess database, the most common move is ed5. I think e5 is pretty nice here. You'll see that I kind of like to play this move in response to a lot of things that Black does in this regard. And again, this is personal preference. I don't know if that's the best thing. Yeah, I don't know if this is like the engine's best move or if it's the best move. But I really like playing positions where I've kind of got control over the center and black's a little bit cramped. I have more space, and I like d4 and e5. I think it's pretty nice. And now you'll see we're kind of getting into this is again starting to feel like a French, and now we have a French defense advanced variation, right? So basically, it's just a French advance with e5, and we just do the classic b6. Um, I mean, there's a lot. I'm not about to start talking about the French, but yeah, this is just classic French situation. Takes b4, lashing out at the queen. You'll see queen b6, and now we have, some really nice ideas with our knight hopping in. You can see this weak square here on d6 with this dark square bishop being blocked. We have these really interesting ideas of kind of recapturing on c4, not with the bishop, but with this knight. And even if you push c3, guess what? Knight c4 and knight d6 is coming, and it's just wrecking everything. I mean, it's completely disgusting. Especially, I mean, we come up, we hit the queen, so there's nothing that the queen can do. Quite queen c7 is almost forced here, and you end up with this situation where black is just completely miserable here. I mean, we're just gonna windmill him, just hit him with the windmill, right? Discover, take everything, and it's a mess. And this is what you want. This is what you want in the position. So this is not a French defense kind of this isn't about the French defense, but I do love this line in the French and this idea of jumping the knight into d6 when you see this kind of situation. So that's stingy three. We're going to four first, not five. Four. I. Instead of IV. I went with four eyes because whatever. Shout out to Roman numerals. So again, we got the same situation, but this time, instead of we actually they take on e4, but now after we play knight g5, instead of taking on d3 and allowing us to develop the light squared bishop, they play h6. All right. They play h6. And yeah, we can simply just recapture the pawn, and we have a pretty nice centralized knight here. Um, yeah, it's not like they're playing f5 to push our knight away. Bishop f5 is fine. I mean, I don't. You want to drop the bishop pair immediately. Yeah, so simply bishop e2, simple developing move. Bishop f5. We can trade off the knights. And now I think this is pretty pleasant for white. I don't really see any issues with this. I mean, I really don't. And this is pretty common. H6 maybe isn't super common. If we look after knight g5, h6 is down there. This is in the 4% range. Pretty much you're going to see ed3 or knight f6, which we've talked about. We've talked about knight f6, but ed is going to be our main is the main move there. But this h6 move, you see it a couple times, so I figured I'd cover it. And you just get a nice position, right? You just get a nice position, castles, trade the light squared bishops, bring the queen out. And yeah, I really don't think that you're in any danger here. And well, black's kingside is quite annoying. This is just pretty annoying to deal with. I now have the e file. My knight and my bishop essentially develop themselves, and I'm just putting a lot of pressure on some of these weaknesses from this destroyed king side, and you're not getting castled here, right? It's just going to be a bit of annoyance. Um, yeah, and if we could also play d4 in this situation and take a pawn on h6. So, yeah, you castle. I'm going to take your pawn on h6. Great. So, anyway, I think that we'll move on to our next stingy situation here. So this one is going to be same, a little bit different. Instead of h6, we have knight f6. So like I talked about before, I said the two knight f6 is your most common, uh, other than ed3, knight f6 and ed3 combined to essentially create, what is that, 83%? If I'm doing my math right. Yeah, so you're gonna essentially get every single possible retort to knight g5 by covering knight f6 and ed3. So after knight f6, we have knight c3 and ed3. So once they capture this pawn, we all know what we're doing. Bishop takes d3. Now they don't necessarily have to play ed3. We could have bishop g4 instead, which is another interesting option from black, just hitting our queen, in which case we simply sidestep queen d2. It looks a little bit awkward, blocking the development of the dark squared bishop, but what we get is we're still blocking the queen trade, right? After e takes and developing, pushing our knight back. These all seem like logical moves from black, right? They've developed the light squared bishop, hit our queen, we've shifted out of the way, we even blocking the development of our dark squared bishop. And now they're going to push our knight back, right? We're just going to play knight f3. Well, guess what? No, we're not. As you just saw, I kind of slipped a little bit, but knight f2. Knight f2 is the move here. What an amazing. Oh, it's so nice, right? And these are the kind of tactics I said you always, when you're playing this line, you always need to be thinking about knight takes f2, sacrifices on f2, because guess what? After king takes f7, we have bishop g6 check, and you'll see that the king cannot go back to defend the queen, which is undefended, and we have this nice discovery, right? It's game over, right? Boop, and boop, over, over. King takes g6, boom, right? Doesn't matter what you do. Doesn't matter. So I mean, and you just get a winning position there. So if ED3, great, we're developing, and if not ED3, right, if something like Bishop G4, guess what? Move the queen out of the way, wait for them to make a mistake, and immediately F7, right? It's just that potent of an opening, and that's why you see white is so favored in a lot of these lines, is because these tactics are, if you know the tactics, you can win almost instantly. So back to our main line, Knight C3. bishop takes, or excuse me, pawn takes, bishop recaptures, and h6. And what do you think's going to happen? Boom, you guessed it, f7 again. There's nothing he can do. Check, over, over. It's amazing. It's perfect. This is the kind of thing that you're just going to do. You're going to get over and over in this line. And you'll see this isn't just a random thing. Thousands and thousands of players are going into this, right? This is not a new thing. If you look at these lines, right? H6 is huge. H6 is the most common move here, right? And bishop g4 subsequently walking into h6 after queen d2 is also the second most common move here. And even after, even after e6 in this position, right? Like if we play bishop d3, d2, ED3 is our most common move, right? I mean, they can play E6 here. I don't know if E6 is, I don't think E6 is all that great. If you play E6, you're still doing fine, right? We recapture, and it's going to turn into more of a normal game. But the main thing here is we always have to keep our minds open to sacrifices on F2 due to the undefended nature of Black's queen. I think I need to sneeze. One second. I didn't have to sneeze. I was able to power through it there. So that's kind of what we're thinking about. I've got one more case for everybody here. So D3, D5, same thing, nothing's changing. Knight F3, DE, Knight G5, and Bishop F5, double defending E4, right? Or excuse me, single defending E4. I don't know why you'd play this, honestly. It's not a great move. But you'll see Bishop F5 is the third most common move here. I covered the other ones. Not really liked by the engine at all, obviously, because it's kind of a weirdo. But if they do play Bishop F5, all we need to do is play Knight C3, simple developing move. We're kind of really pushing them to play ED3, and you'll see most players will play ED3 here. If DE4, we could also play DE4, but you're just asking for that queen trade. So one of the common themes here again is not allowing this queen trade on the D file, and if you ever find yourself wanting to take on E4, you have to be careful of opening yourself up to the queen trade. Because if you get the queen trade, you're just going to end up in pretty much an even end game, if not a little bit worse, especially if you've lost castling. I guess it doesn't really matter since the queens are off the board. Maybe you want to advance your king anyway, but yeah, it's going to turn into a bit of a boring end game. And I think you're playing this not for a boring end game. You're playing this for like some fun tactics and to kind of catch your Caro-Kann wielding opponent off guard. So after Knight C3, ED, I think this is a really nice move here. It's played by a smaller percentage of players, but it's the winning move. So whenever you think about this, if you ever think person for some reason is deciding to over defend on F5 with their bishop, right? Oh, excuse me, over defend E4 with their bishop on F5. Once you do this knight c3 move, trying to goad them into taking, this is the one scenario where bishop takes d. So most people here are playing bishop takes d3, but the better move is queen f3, right? Queen f3 opens up a lot of possibilities here, right? It's a really nice move. And again, what are we doing? Notice this pressure on f2. Again, a lot of pressure on, oops, a lot of pressure on f2. A lot of pressure on f2. And that's one of the common themes throughout this series. Burping again. Shout out to burping. This is one of the most common themes, right? Pressure on F2. Yeah. Oh man, that is F7 by the way, not F2. I know my I know my squares. Yeah. So again, pressure on F7. I wonder if I've been saying F2 the whole time. That'd be hilarious. So G6, reinforcing the bishop. Guess what we do? Now we're putting more pressure on the bishop. That bishop can't move, right? If that bishop moves away, it's going to be absolutely lights out once we take on F2. F7. Oh my God, F7. F7 with the queen. So H6, pushing the knight back. Oh, we still take on F7. Again, what did I say? This is a common theme here of ripping F7 with the knight over and over. It's amazing. You just hit F7 and boom, it's completely shattered, right? This is completely shattered. Whenever you and another theme, so taking on F7, whenever you have this situation, queen lined up with the king and this bishop on F5, and I'm not saying this as like, oh, pin, attack the pin piece with a pawn, like yeah, that's one thing. Just have that in your mind, right? And I think some players might be tempted to just exchange here, right? Like bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes, and then probably end up with like king back to e8 or king to g7, and yeah, again, you don't have like an immediate win there necessarily. So I think the strongest move here, yeah, you'll see the one game that's made it to this, he played bishop takes f5. I think the stronger move here is g4, right? And g4 opens up a lot of possibilities. A couple other sidelines I'll show you guys. So after queen f3, g6 is one opportunity. They could also play e6, which ends up with the same exact thing because you just get this king on f7 and what did I say? G4 again, right? It's just such a nice move here. We're just completely peeling open the side of the board. D takes c2. He's getting greedy. This is just, you can't do this, right? It's going to be game over pretty soon. And the king is completely filleted in the center of the board. C4 check, king e8, queen takes, queen, queen trade? No, I don't think so, right? It's pretty amazing what you can get out of this line. Castles, knight, and there's just not much that the black is going to be able to do here. Bishop takes d7 is begging to be played. Bishop takes d7, and he can't do anything about it because queen takes e1 is illegal. It's illegal. He can't do it, right? He's under check. So boom, and this is just nasty. Now we're just leaving it. We're just leaving E1 out there, right? Developing more pieces, putting more pressure on the queen, right? Again, if queen takes, it's going to be complete. It's completely over. Um, Queen takes. He's going to be down queen for a rook. Now my rook is coming to E1 with no queen defense. It's completely over. In fact, yeah, it's a few moves away from mate. So knight F6. Queen just recaptures the pawn, and there's nothing he can do. We can just wait because his queen is completely pinned. He can't block the pin in any meaningful manner. And if he ever takes on e1, we're winning. We're winning immediately. So it's just brutal. We just leave his queen there the whole time. And this is pretty much game over. So boom, we've gone over all the ways that black can be stingy, right? We've gone over all of the different ways and we've talked about them. So, just for review, there's a variety of different things that black can do here. We talked about the bishop coming out, right? That was one of the things we talked about. After DE4, knight G5, they don't necessarily have to take on D3 right away, right? They could play knight F6. They could play knight f6 here. They could play e6 here. That's another common move. And even after d takes e4, knight g5, you'll see that e takes d3 is common, but you'll also see knight f6 here. You could see bishop f5, which we talked about. Remember, when the bishop comes out to f5, right? What happens when f3 becomes available? The queen occupies it, right? Bishop f5, queen f3. And yeah, bishop f5. We goad them into taking on d3, and then queen f3 becomes a real threat with that issues on f7, not f2. So those are the kind of the main things that we want to be thinking about. The other things we want to be thinking about are what happens when they go into it with d takes e3 and bishop takes d3. My voice is pretty dry right now, so I think I'm going to save that for a different video. But I will record that one, I think tonight. And I just need some water, honestly, and take a quick pause. So hopefully that was helpful. We're gonna get into exactly how you attack black once they actually do decide to go into this, which is again the most common thing that will happen. And you'll have some really nice prep against that and pretty much get a winning position, I would say 75 to 80% of the time, and at very least have a nice end game where you're just playing for you could still play for a win. So yeah, we'll end it there, and later, my positivity pickle says goodbye.